She turns the key before she even reaches the door. It's a small habit, formed over years, a way of shaving 2 seconds off the walk from car to hallway. The hallway light flickers on, mail on the counter. A charger cord draped over yesterday's mug. Somewhere behind her, the door clicks shut, and her shoulders do not drop. They should. This is, technically, the place where the day is supposed to end. Instead, something in her tightens, almost imperceptibly, the way a muscle tightens before it remembers there's no longer any danger. She isn't poor. She isn't messy by nature. Her home is, by most standards, perfectly fine. It just doesn't feel like rest. This is not a story about money. It is not a story about taste. It is a story about a gap. The gap between a house that holds your things and a house that holds you. And what looks, from the outside, like simple Japanese minimalism is actually something far more deliberate. A 400-year-old engineering decision about where the eye and the nervous system underneath it is finally allowed to rest. Stick around. Because by the time we're finished, you won't just understand why 5-star hotels quietly borrow these same principles. You'll know exactly which 3 to steal first, tonight, for free. This is an exploration of design psychology and Japanese spatial philosophy, not a renovation manual, no purchase required, just attention. Here is the myth most of us are operating on, often without ever stating it out loud. More square footage, plus more furniture, plus more storage solutions, equals more comfort. It's tidy. It's intuitive. It is also, according to the data, almost entirely backwards. In 2009, psychologist Darby Saxby at the University of California, Los Angeles, working with Rena Rapati, brought 60 working spouses into their own homes with a camera and asked them to simply give a tour. Describe the rooms the way you would for a guest. Researchers ran those descriptions through linguistic analysis software, sorting the language into 2 buckets: words that sounded restorative and words that sounded stressful. Then, for 3 days afterward, they tested those same spouses' cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, through simple saliva samples. The wives who used more cluttered, more stressed language about their homes showed flatter cortisol curves across the day. Flat, here, is not calm. Flat is the chemical signature of a nervous system that never fully recovers. The women who described their homes in restorative language, meanwhile, showed steeper, healthier curves. The kind associated with genuine daily recovery. The size of the home was never the variable. The language people used to describe it was, which means comfort isn't a function of how much space you fill. It's a function of how much your mind is allowed to rest inside it. The first secret hiding inside that luxury hotel feeling isn't a secret about objects at all. It's a secret about absence. There is a concept in Japanese spatial thinking called ma. The word itself points to 2 things at once: emptiness and interval. The same way the silence between 2 notes is what makes the music make sense in the first place. Without the pause, there is no song. Without empty space, there is no room, only storage. For most Western interiors, the instinct is to fill. A wall becomes a place for a shelf. A shelf becomes a place for objects. A corner becomes a place for a chair nobody sits in. Each addition feels, individually, harmless. Together, they create what design psychologists call visual noise. And visual noise is processed by the brain almost identically to auditory noise. It demands low-grade, continuous attention, even when you're not looking directly at it. This is the shift the first group of secrets is built around, from accumulation to arrangement. A hallway with one object placed with intention reads, to the eye, as luxurious. A hallway with 12 objects placed without it reads as cluttered. Even if every individual item, on its own, was beautiful. The first cluster of secrets. Sight lines kept clear at eye level, light allowed to travel uninterrupted across a room, furniture pulled slightly back from walls to let space breathe around it. All of them are really one secret, repeated. Subtraction, done with intention, is not absence. It is the room finally being given permission to speak. And here is the part worth sitting with. This isn't an aesthetic preference. It's a nervous system response. A room your eyes can scan without obstruction is a room your brain doesn't have to keep working in. If ma is about what you remove, the second concept governs what survives that removal, and why it gets to stay. It's called yohaku no bai. Break it down, and you get two ideas fused together: leftover space and beauty. The principle that what you choose not to fill is doing exactly as much work as what you do. This is where luxury hotels diverge sharply from the average home. Not in how much they own, but in what survives the edit. A 5-star room rarely contains more objects than a cluttered apartment. It contains fewer, chosen with almost forensic restraint. One ceramic vessel instead of 6. A single textured throw instead of 4 mismatched ones. A lamp whose base is solid wood. Not because wood is trendy, but because the hand, on contact, can tell the difference between something real and something pretending. This is the second cluster of secrets: material honesty over material quantity. Stone, raw wood, linen, unlacquered clay. These surfaces age visibly, and that visibility is not a flaw to disguise. It's the entire point. A scratch in real wood tells a story. A scratch in laminate just looks broken. Color follows the same restraint. Hotels that read as expensive rarely use more than 2 or 3 tones in a single room. Warm neutrals, muted earth, the occasional deep accent, never competing with each other for attention. Color, used this sparingly, stops being decoration and starts functioning as a kind of visual quiet. What you're left with, when you apply Yohaku no Bai correctly, isn't an empty room. It's a room where every object earns its place by what it doesn't try to compete with. Here is where most people, hearing all this, reach the wrong conclusion. They assume the goal is simply less. Fewer objects, blanker walls, an apartment that photographs well precisely because there's nothing left to photograph. That isn't minimalism. That's just absence wearing minimalism's clothing. Picture 2 rooms side by side. The first, a 5-star suite with perhaps 8 objects in total, each one selected, each one expensive, each one placed with intention, and the room feels rich. The second, a budget apartment with the same 8-object count, furniture chosen only because it was cheap and matched nothing in particular, and the room feels hollow, same quantity, opposite emotional result. The difference was never how much was removed. It was whether what remained was chosen on purpose or simply left behind by accident. Emptiness, by itself, is just a vacuum. Curated emptiness is a decision, and the nervous system, it turns out, can tell the two apart almost instantly. The first 2 pillars explain the room. This last one explains the person standing inside it, and this is where the science gets quietly profound. The deepest of the 3 concepts is called shibumi. It comes from a word that originally described a slightly bitter, astringent taste. And somewhere across centuries, that idea of pleasantly understated became the highest compliment you could give a piece of design. Not loud, not flashy, effortless, in a way that takes enormous effort to achieve. But shibumi was never really about objects. It was always about behavior, about the rituals a person performs inside a space, day after day, without announcement or audience. This is the third cluster of secrets, and it's the one almost nobody talks about, because it costs nothing to buy. It's the habit of wiping down a kitchen counter each night, not because guests are coming, but because tomorrow you deserve to walk into a clean one. It's removing shoes at the threshold, a small physical boundary that tells the nervous system, outside stress stops here. It's making the bed within minutes of waking, not from discipline alone, but because an ordered first 5 minutes shapes the emotional tone of the next 16 hours. Neuroscience has a name for what's happening underneath these small acts. Environmental cues that the nervous system learns to associate with safety. Each time you perform the same small ritual in the same small space, you are laying down what researchers call a neural pathway, a literal, physical shortcut in the brain that links this specific action, in this specific place, with a felt sense of calm. This is the part that separates a habit from an identity. A behavior performed once is just an action. A behavior repeated, in the same space, hundreds of times, stops being something you do and starts becoming something you are. The home doesn't just reflect who you are anymore. Through repetition, it begins to build who you are. That's the real difference between a hotel room and a home. A hotel room is restorative because someone else maintains the ritual for you, once, before you arrive. A home becomes restorative only when you maintain the ritual for yourself, every single day, until your nervous system stops treating it as a chore and starts treating it as identity. 5-star hotels can rent you the feeling of shibumi for a weekend. Only repetition, inside your own four walls, can make it permanently yours. It's worth knowing where all of this actually began, because the origin makes the modern version make more sense. Centuries ago, during the Muromachi period, Japanese tea masters were designing small structures meant for nothing more than the quiet act of preparing and drinking tea. Every element inside a tea house was deliberate. The low doorway forcing a guest to bow on entry, the single scroll on an otherwise bare wall, the deliberate gap of unused space beside it. Ma and Shibumi weren't abstract philosophy in these rooms. They were architecture, built one beam at a time, in service of a single feeling, presence, uninterrupted by clutter. That 400-year-old logic didn't disappear. It migrated. Walk through the lobby of a contemporary luxury resort, the kind built by hospitality groups known for restraint over excess, and you'll find the same bones. A single sculptural object instead of a cluttered display case, deliberate gaps of negative space between furniture groupings, natural materials left visibly imperfect rather than polished into anonymity. Modern architects studying hospitality design didn't invent the feeling of luxury minimalism. They borrowed it, almost intact, from a 400-year-old tea house. The line from there to here is direct. It just took 4 centuries to get carpeted. So if you only take one thing from everything we've covered, let it be this. Tonight, before bed, clear one single surface completely. Not the whole house. One surface. A counter, a nightstand, the top of a dresser. Leave it empty, deliberately, the way a tea house leaves a wall empty. Notice, tomorrow morning, what it feels like to look at it. That's Ma, in its smallest possible form. And small forms, repeated, are how identities get built. Because here's the quiet truth underneath all 15 of these secrets. A luxury hotel isn't expensive because of what it contains. It's restful because of what it deliberately leaves out and what it repeats, night after night, without exception. Your home can hold that same restraint. It was never about the budget. It was always about the editing. If something in this video shifted the way you see your own front door, send it to the one person in your life who's still convinced that more furniture is the answer. Sometimes the kindest thing you can hand someone isn't advice. It's permission to remove something. This video is for educational and reflective purposes only, and is not a substitute for professional interior design or mental health advice.